Now, the Federation of Irish Sport has called for a resilience fund to help Irish sport get through this very difficult period. The Federation of Irish Sport are the umbrella group for national governing bodies, and they are the voice of Irish sport. And I'm delighted to say Mary O'Connor, the CEO of the Federation of Irish Sport, is with us this morning. Mary, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with there's a couple of things that we want to talk about. One is this call for our resilience fund. What would the fund do and how would it work?
The resilience fund is necessary. National governing bodies and local clubs all over the country are facing a huge challenge. Since there's an unprecedented halt in sporting activity, they have no way of generating income which they normally would, which would be subscriptions and obviously activity, gate receipts, event activity, and the hosting of summer camps and coaching courses. So we need a resilience fund to help them remain viable.
How would it be administered? Who would pay for it? How much do you need?
That's a really good question regarding the figure. The longer this goes on, it's so uncertain, it's very difficult to actually put a figure on it. Obviously, we're looking for a government solution on this, and I've been proactively working with the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport and Sport Ireland to try and see where can finance be found and also how it can be administered to the national governing bodies of sport, but also to the local clubs as well.
Because, look, we saw just yesterday a couple of boxing clubs who are saying they're now essentially homeless. One because the building was sold out from underneath them, and the other one because they're not getting a rent freeze. That's just an example of what we're going to see from lots of clubs right around the country. Any club that doesn't actually own its own pitch, that's renting, and you know they're not going to have, as you said, the ability to raise funds. So, how are similar schemes like this in existence around the world? Are there practical ways that we can actually address this and learn from other jurisdictions?
Yeah, look, obviously, you know, what's happened to Bray and Tullow is really unfortunate, but unfortunately it's something that possibly we want to see more of. If clubs can't generate income, obviously they're going to struggle to survive as well as Bray and Tullow did. Sport New Zealand have activated a resilience fund, as have Sport England, Sport Wales and Sport Northern Ireland as well. So there is international examples of how this is being rolled out. Sport New Zealand and have activated 147 million bailout for resilience fund, and I think that resilience fund is really important because it gives people some type of security. What we want to try and do is make sure the sport remains viable, that it can adapt and become stronger, because we're going to be living with COVID-19 for a long time.
I think in instances like this, it's always no harm to explain why sport matters. We all have a kind of general sense of it being important as a health policy, an education policy, a social policy, whatever, but actually affirming why these sports clubs are very important at a local community level, and why, given all of the other drain and resources that the state coffers have, at this moment we should siphon off a certain amount for sports clubs.
Yeah, look, absolutely. People would see sport as being great for physical and emotional well-being, and that's absolutely correct. You know, especially in rural areas, the local sports club is your focus point. It's possibly where, you know, due to closing down, you know, public houses and so on, it's where your focal point is. I think the important to understand is that sport exists in this country in many guises, and what we can't take for granted is that expectation that that'll be the same way as COVID-19 goes on. Sport has also a huge economic value. It accounts for 2.7 billion in annual consumer spending on the island of Ireland every year. It employs 40,000 people in the job sector. So it has a huge economic value as well. And a lot of time people don't see that. And it has an economic value not just at national level, but at local level as well. And the one thing we're saying about the Resilience Fund is people will apply for funding from the Resilience Fund based on need. There have to be an evidence of need. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand. National governing bodies, for the most part, are not-for-profit organisations who exist to organise sport across the island of Ireland. And if 13,000 clubs that feed into our national sporting organisations are under pressure, then as a consequence of that, the national governing bodies will also be under pressure, and sport will struggle to remain viable, not just at a national level, but really at a local level.
Mary, how much do you see sport returning to its viability over the next 2-3 months as we go through the phases of the government's roadmap? Do you see anything in that gives you hope?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the likes of tennis and golf have a huge responsibility on them, and they'll take it really seriously, the protocols that they put in place for return to sport. So you have to be very careful with that. But I mean, obviously sport was one of the first sectors to adhere to the government guidelines. There was a complete halt activity, and sport respects and obviously endorses the emergency health team's directions. But it's going to take time, and obviously I'm a sports fan like all of you, and we'd like to see sport back, but we have to be sure and cognizant of the fact that people have lost their lives to this awful disease, and we have to take our time and be sure that it is safe for all participants to go back to. And I think you all can't underestimate the psychological work that needs to be done, especially for kids and for parents maybe, to ensure that they realise that it is safe for their child to go back to participating in sport and physical activity, whatever the sport was.
How should that be managed? You've called for the introduction of a task force as well. It feels like there certainly should be some kind of cross-industry body who's saying, look, this is what we've learned, this is best practice from around the world, this is the latest research. Because again, as was the case at the very start of the crisis, people are getting information. Children are no longer super spreaders. Actually, they're less likely to spread the disease. And then all of a sudden, there's the emergence of a new respiratory illness, which seems to be specifically targeting children. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, don't worry about that. It's only been 3 cases. Like, the information that's coming through, depending on what your sources is either very positive or kind of a little bit still concerning. So how do clubs and the government and the Federation of Irish Sport and sponsors and broadcasters all come together to kind of say, well, look, what is our official nationally agreed pathway here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Federation welcomed the Return to Sport expert group that has been established. And I'm sure that expert group, when they're coming up with their views on return to sport, you can't underestimate the cost that implies for local clubs and organisations as well, to put in infrastructure, things like hand sanitizer, signage, also the training of volunteers, risk assessments at local level. And you talk about local level sport, talking about volunteers, and that's a huge responsibility for them. We need to take that into thinking, but also the task force that we're looking for. We wanted to sit alongside the Resilience Fund. We want the Resilience Fund to come, and obviously because it's urgent, it's needed. Some of the national government bodies are really feeling the financial pressures at the moment. And the task force, we want innovative thinking, we want swift action, we want to learn from international best practice. And I think you're right, there needs to be that communality that exists in sport anyway, across the whole sector, to ensure that when sport does come back, that obviously people feel happy, safe, and secure that they can enjoy their sport in a safe manner as they did previously.
Whose job is it to set up that task force? Is it a government? I mean, does this now need political support, A, to give you the money, and B, to set up a task force and give it some teeth?
Yeah, look, obviously we need a government solution to this, and the Federation of Irish Sport has submitted documentation to Ministers Griffin and Minister Ross on this, and we're waiting on a reply from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. But I must say that we have worked quite closely with Sport Ireland, the Department and Minister Griffin on this topic for a number of weeks now, and we've had a number of meetings. So they know the reality, and they're aware of the situation that's going on. And obviously the tourism working group was announced yesterday. But the most important thing for the sport right now is we need a resilience fund to assist sport to remain viable, because it will cost the government an awful lot more money to restart sport post-COVID-19. We need to make sure that sport remains viable now.
Mary, it's interesting that you mentioned the tourism sector had been looked after there over the last couple of days. It was certainly one of the talking points that we had during the general election, especially about how sport is governed on a political level. After the general election, is there the possibility of sport being in a different department, allied with different things that aren't transport and tourism? Does this opportunity now, where there is no sport happening, give you the chance to have a think, and other power brokers in our sport to have a think about how sport is run politically and how we might proceed in the future, that things are better for sport? I'm not saying that things are run badly whatsoever, but just to improve things on an overall level going forward.
Yeah, the Federation of Irish Sport, coming to the general election, we obviously submitted our thoughts on sport in a manifesto to all the parties going for election, and that's one thing we put in, to look in taking tourism and sport away from the transport department, simply because the department, it's a massive department. Obviously transport is huge in this country. We wanted to have own ministerial positions for tourism and sport, and maybe the opportunity is there now to to redraw the lines with the new government formations, and we certainly, endorse that. Tourism is a huge sector economically to Ireland, but also if you look at sports tourism, it's worth at least 500 million annually to Ireland, and that's without hosting any big international sporting events such as international rugby matches, soccer matches, or golf tournaments.
Mary, I did want to just bring up one last thing before we go, and that was obviously this year was supposed to be the culmination of the campaign for 20 by 20. Obviously, it was not supposed to be the end. It was supposed to be the start of something different, but the campaign was called 20 by 20, and all those targets were put in for this year. Have you any sense yet of what's going to happen with the campaign? Do you make sure that it goes into 2021 now, given that it will essentially be 2021 before some sense of normality returns to the coverage of sport?
Yeah, look, obviously from a Federation of Irish Sport point of view and from a 2020 movement point of view, the commitment was to October of 2020, and that's the goal we're working towards. Obviously, the work of the campaign has been stymied now due to COVID-19, but we're still working hard. There's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes. And obviously then we have the 20 by 20 movement still interacting and still motivating people to be physically active during COVID-19, because that's what we wanted the campaign to be. We wanted to resonate not just with people who already participate in sport, but also people who might think about getting back into sport or actually participate in sport for the first time. So it's a kind of a campaign that has had real success. We've been blown away by the success it's had, and we want to try and continue on to that, but obviously we're aiming for an October finish currently. All
right, Mary, we'll leave it there. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
It's Mary O'Connor there, the Chief Executive of the Federation of Irish Sport, talking about the need for a resilience fund to help a lot of clubs who are in difficulty just see this period out so that they're still standing when we come out the other side. And I think that's definitely going to be a focus of a lot of conversations, is what can we save and how much money do we have to be able to allocate to save different things. And every industry is obviously lobbying very hard at the moment to try and make a special case and an exceptional case. I think this is an opportunity for us all to reflect on just how important sports clubs are going to be in getting people out, getting people active from a mental health perspective, from a wellness perspective, from a fitness, from a health. Notwithstanding the fact that we all want to go and see games, if people can go back training, if people can go back and be socially distant while at the same time being together, then you can see the benefits that that's going to have for our society straight away and right into the future as well. So if you've got any thoughts on that, 087 9180 180 is the number that you can get us on by WhatsApp, or of course you can always tweet the show at Off The Ball. Now, coming next, we have this here. Yeah, so sorry about that. One more thing we did want to bring your way this morning is the story of Ballinamore, Sean O'Heslin's GAA club in Leitrim. There's a piece up around the club on offtheball.com which you can read now. The club has 69 female members, which is more than a quarter of the club's total membership. And the ladies' side of things has only been in existence since 2003. They've moved up through the ranks of junior football into intermediate, and for 2020 they've qualified for senior. You can read all about the club and how they're growing the ladies' side of the operation on offtheball.com. Have a look at this.
My favourite thing about playing Gaelic football is it keeps me fit and healthy while working hard on a team with my friends.
My greatest highlight to date was reversing our earlier defeat to our great rivals to win the Shield final in 2019.
I joined the Sean O'Heslin Ladies in 2007, a relatively new club that was founded in 2003.
Our under 9 under 11 teams are made up of 60% from girl players. As part of our club philosophy to make sure that those girls can progress into the senior levels.
Jack Sports, exclusive distribution partner to Under Armour Team Sports, is excited to let Ballinamore Sean O'Heslin's club know that your €1,000 worth of kit will be ready for you when you get back up training and playing.